Hey guys, how you doing? In today's video, we're covering another character from BFN, this time being Imp. He's one of the characters that ended up changing the most in BFN, at least in terms of kit tinkering, so this should be pretty interesting. I don't want to keep this intro going on for too long, so let's just get right into it. Of course, we're starting out this section with a history lesson, so let's start with his origin. Imp was one of the final zombies you encountered in the original PVZ, and he was also the weakest. But he doesn't normally ride alone. He has a Gargantuar as a companion, and when the Gargantuar is weakened enough, he'll throw Imp into your defenses. Since that point in time, Imp has pretty much stayed the same, though interestingly enough, Imp actually has a role in the shooters as both a character and a spawnable AI. But now's not the time to go through every Imp entry in the franchise. Instead, let's focus on Imp's basic stats. Imp has 75 HP, he has a double jump, with the second jump allowing him to briefly glide in the air, and he deals 4 to 5 damage in normal circumstances, with a total RPM of 725. He also has 56 ammo, so he can fire bullets at a consistent rate. So far, it seems like Imp is pretty good. Now let's look into his abilities. Let's start with the gravity grenade, and oh boy. This ability kind of sucks. So basically, this ability allows Imp to throw a grenade that captures plants inside of it, but the grenade itself is incredibly small, so it makes catching larger enemies a bit of a cruel joke. Even if you do capture an enemy, as long as they have a movement ability, they can get out of it with relative ease, so there's almost no point in using it in the first place. Next up is Imp Kata, and this ability also stinks. This ability is simple in concept. It just makes Imp spin in a circle while dealing small damage that increases over time. And while this is great on paper, in actual gameplay it's heavily flawed. At the very most, you can deal 3 damage per bullet, and while that's not bad at all, it still suffers from another major flaw that makes this even worse. The range. It doesn't reach very far, and enemies can also see exactly where your bullets are traveling, making the ability very easy to avoid. Honestly, if you ask me, my best advice for this ability is to only use it if you have ripcord, but I'm getting ahead of myself. And finally, we have Robocall. And believe it or not, this ability is actually good. Basically, this ability throws Imp into a mech, and while the damage output is roughly the same, the rate that it fires at is much higher. And while there is a cooldown to the laser, the mech has other stuff you can mess around with while you're waiting for it. In particular, there's 3 mech abilities. Missile Madness, which fires multiple rockets at your opponents that deal between 14 and 42 damage. Explosive Escape, which forces Imp out of the mech, detonating the mech after a few seconds. And Bionic Bash, which makes the Z-Mech smash its robo-hand into the ground, dealing 75 damage to any plant near its range. Oh, and did I forget to mention that the mech also takes 15% less damage than a normal character? So needless to say, the Z-Mech is very good. Overall, while Imp is certainly good on his own, he definitely needs his mech ability to be truly good. But that's not to say he's bad at all, because he has upgrades that enhance him and his abilities. So let's discuss a few. Okay, I'm going to be honest. I'm pretty limited on time to make this video, so what I'll be doing now is combining the next 2 sections into one big section. So in other words, I'll discuss the 3 builds I came up with for Imp, and within each build, I'll discuss the upgrades I chose and what they do. Sorry about this slight inconvenience, but I hope you guys enjoy this regardless. With that slight disclaimer out of the way, let's get into the 3 builds I created. And of course, this section is here for you guys to use, so don't hesitate to use or modify any of these builds. Anyways, the first build is very simple. It's just a mech build. It contains Mech Hunter and Energize. Mech Hunter lowers the refresh time of Robocall when you deal a lot of damage with it, and Energize gives your mech fuel if you hit a plant with Bionic Bash. 12.5 seconds of fuel to be exact. So basically, this build is for the mech players out there, and I'm sure you guys can bet that this is my personal favorite build. Next up is a build of the exact opposite nature, using Ripcord, Supermassive, and Combo. I briefly touched on Ripcord's usefulness, but I didn't discuss what it actually did. It basically makes Imp Kata 25% faster, and this makes it much easier to get vanquishes. On top of this, Supermassive basically makes Gravity Grenade as big as it was in Garden Warfare 2, so it's much easier to capture enemies in it. And of course, I'm sure you can guess why Combo is here. This build is overall helpful to the players who prefer to stay out of the mech, but the mech is still definitely an option here. And last but certainly not least is another other mech setup, with this one including Multiplying Madness, Energize, and Combo. Multiplying Madness just increases Missile Madness by 9 seconds if you get a Vanquish with it. And yes, it is genuinely as broken as it sounds. So essentially, what you have here is a build that makes Namek nearly unstoppable, compared to the first build making the mech easier to get. All of these builds have their own applications, but I recommend you guys experiment with what you use, as there's plenty of upgrades I didn't include in these builds that have their own uses, such as Butt Booster. And now, with everything we know about Imp, I think it's about time we take a look at the final verdict. Is Imp a good character? I would say yes. However, I wouldn't really recommend this character to anybody new to the game. Imp is a character that, if played wrong, can end up being a borderline nuisance to have on your team. So I would overall say that Imp is good, but you gotta have some experience if you want to be good with this character. But that's how I personally feel. How do you guys feel about Imp? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you're new around here and you like what you see, then drop a like, maybe even subscribe, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.